I'm sure most of you have heard the 1978 classic by Boney M. The song is catchy and fun, but the man behind whom the song was based on was not fun. Well, according to these fine gentlemen, he was not the type of guy you would dance with. But who was the man that Boney M mentioned throughout the music video with such graceful energy? Well, the man in question was known as Grigory Rasputin. And today we are going to talk about the life of Grigory Rasputin and how he became one of the most polarizing and controversial figure in modern-day history. Grigory Rasputin was born on 21st of January 1869 in the small village of Pokrovskoye, then in the Russian Empire. According to some records, his real name was Grigory Yefimovich Novik. There are few records of Rasputin's parents. His father, Yefim, and mother Anna Parshakova, were peasant farmers. According to historian Douglas Smith, Rasputin's youth and early adulthood are a black hole about which we know almost nothing, though the lack of reliable sources and information did not stop others from fabricating stories about Rasputin's parents and his youth after his rise to prominence. Rasputin was not formally educated and remained illiterate well into his early adulthood. Local archival records suggest that he had a somewhat unruly youth, possibly involving drinking, small thefts, and disrespect for local authorities. In 1886, Rasputin traveled to Abalak, where he met a peasant girl named Praskovia Dubrovina. After a courtship of several months, they married in February 1887. The couple had 7 children, though only 3 survived to adulthood: Dmitri, Maria, and Varvara. In 1897, Rasputin developed a renewed interest in religion and left Pokrovskoye to go on a pilgrimage. His reasons are unclear. According to some sources, he left the village to escape punishment for his role in horse theft. Other sources suggest Rasputin had a vision of the Virgin Mary or of Saint Simeon of Verkhoturia, while still others suggest that his pilgrimage was inspired by a young theological student, Melody Zaborovsky. Whatever his reasons, Rasputin cast off his old life. Rasputin had undertaken earlier, shorter pilgrimages to the Holy Znamensky Monastery at Abalak and to Tobolsk's Cathedral, but his visit to the St. Nicholas Monastery at Verkhoturia in 1897 transformed him. There, he met and was profoundly humbled by a starets known as mockery. It was perhaps here that he learned to read and write. However, he later claimed that some of the monks at Verkhoturia engaged in homosexuality and criticized monastic life as too coercive. He returned to Pokrovskoye a changed man, looking disheveled and behaving differently. He became a vegetarian, swore off alcohol, and prayed and sang much more fervently than he had in the past. Rasputin spent the years that followed as a stranik, a holy wanderer or pilgrim, leaving Pokrovskoye for months or even years at a time to wander the country and visit a variety of holy sites. Record states that he wandered as far as Mount Athos, the center of Eastern Orthodox monastic life, in 1900. In the early 1900s, Rasputin had developed a small circle of followers, primarily family members and other local peasants who prayed with him on Sundays and other holy days when he was in Pokrovskoye. Building a makeshift chapel in Yefim's root cellar, Rasputin was still living within his father's household at the time. The group held secret prayer meetings there. These meetings were the subject of some suspicion and hostility from the village priest and other villagers. It was rumored that female followers were ceremonially washing Rasputin before each meeting, that the group sang strange songs, and even that Rasputin had joined the Klisti, a religious sect whose ecstatic rituals were rumored to include self-flagellation and sexual orgies. Word of Rasputin's activity and charisma began to spread in Siberia during the early 1900s. At some point during 1904 or 1905, he traveled to the city of Kazan, where he acquired a reputation as a wise starets who could help people resolve their spiritual crises and anxieties. It was in Kazan where he made a favorable impression on several local religious leaders. Among these were Archimandrite Andrei and Bishop Christanos, who gave Rasputin a letter of recommendation to Bishop Sergei and arranged for him to travel to St. Petersburg. Upon arriving at the Alexander Nevsky Lavra, Rasputin was introduced to church leaders, including Archimandrite Theophan. Theophan was so impressed with Rasputin that he invited him to stay in his home. He went on to become one of Rasputin's most important friends in St. Petersburg. gaining him entry to many of the influential salons where the local aristocracy gathered for religious discussions. It was through these meetings that Rasputin attracted some of his early and influential followers. Rasputin's ideas and strange manners made him the subject of intense curiosity among the city's elite, who, according to Foreman, were bored, cynical, and seeking new experiences. During this period, Rasputin's appeal may have been enhanced by the fact that he was also a native Russian, unlike other self-described holy men. Rasputin stayed in St. Petersburg for only a few months on his first visit and returned to Pokrovskoye in the fall of 1903. By 1905, Rasputin had formed friendships with several members of the aristocracy, including the Black Princesses, Militsa and Anastasia of Montenegro, who had married cousins of Tsar Nicholas II, Grand Duke Peter Nikolaevich, and Prince George Maximilianovich Romanowski, and were instrumental in introducing Rasputin to the Tsar and his family. Rasputin first met Nicholas on the 1st of November 1905 at the Peterhof Palace. The Tsar recorded the event in his diary, writing that he and his Empress consort Alexandra Feodorovna had made the acquaintance of a man of God, Grigory, from Tobolsk province. Rasputin returned to Pokrovskoye shortly after their first meeting, and he often sent Nicholas a telegram asking to present the Tsar with an icon of Saint Simeon of Verkhoturye. By this time, Rasputin had become a close companion to Nicholas and Alexandra, and the meetings between the three became quite often. At some point, Nicholas and Alexandra became convinced that Rasputin possessed the miraculous power to heal their only son, Tsarevich Alexei Nikolaevich, who suffered from hemophilia. Much of Rasputin's influence with the imperial family stemmed from the belief by Alexandra and others that he had on several occasions eased Alexei's pain and stopped his bleeding. According to historian Mark Farrow, the Tsarina had a passionate attachment to Rasputin, believing he could heal her son's affliction. Alexandra summoned Rasputin to pray for the Alexei when he had an internal hemorrhage in the spring of 1907. Well, it's not quite mentioned that Rasputin really had healing powers, but miraculously, Alexei recovered the next morning. Alexandra's friend Anna Virubova became convinced that Rasputin had miraculous powers shortly thereafter, and became one of his most influential advocates. During the summer of 1912, Alexei developed a hemorrhage in his thigh and groin after a jolting carriage ride near the imperial hunting grounds at Spawa, which caused a large hematoma. In severe pain and delirious with fever, the Tsarevich appeared close to death. In desperation, Alexandra sent Rasputin a telegram, asking him to pray for Alexei. Rasputin wrote back quickly, telling the Tsarina that God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much. The next morning, Alexei's condition was unchanged, but Alexandra was encouraged by the message and regained some hope that he would survive. His bleeding stopped the following day. Dr. S.P. Fedorov, one of the physicians who attended Alexei, admitted that the recovery was wholly inexplicable from a medical point of view. Later, Dr. Fedorov admitted that Alexandra could not be blamed for seeing Rasputin as a miracle man. Rasputin would come in, walk up to the patient, look at him, and spit. The bleeding would stop in no time. How could the Empress not trust Rasputin after that? The imperial family's belief in Rasputin's healing powers brought him considerable status and power at court. Nicholas appointed Rasputin his lampadnik, lamplighter, charged with keeping the lamps lit before religious icons in the palace, which gained him regular access to the palace and imperial family. By December 1906, Rasputin had become close enough to ask a special favor of the Tsar, that he be permitted to change his surname to Rasputin Novi, which translates to Rasputin New. Nicholas granted the request, and the name change was speedily processed, suggesting that Rasputin already had the Tsar's favor at that early date. Rasputin used his position to full effect, accepting bribes and sexual favors from admirers and working diligently to expand his influence. Rasputin soon became a controversial figure. He was accused by his enemies of religious heresy and rape, was suspected of exerting undue political influence over the Tsar, and was even rumored to be having an affair with the Tsarina. Opposition to Rasputin's influence grew within the Eastern Orthodox Church. In 1907, the local clergy in Pokrovskoye denounced Rasputin as a heretic, and the Bishop of Tobolsk launched an inquest into his activities, accusing him of spreading false, Christ-like doctrines. In St. Petersburg, Rasputin faced opposition from even more prominent critics, including Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin and the Okhrana, the Tsar's secret police. Having ordered an investigation into Rasputin's activities, Stolypin confronted Nicholas but did not succeed in reining in Rasputin's influence or exiling him from St. Petersburg. Outside of the royal court, Rasputin preached that physical contact between him and others purified them. He engaged in drunken revels and extramarital affairs with a wide range of women, from prostitutes to high society ladies. In 1909, Kionia Berlatskaya, one of Rasputin's early supporters, accused him of rape. Berlatskaya sought aid from Theophan, who became convinced that Rasputin was a danger to the monarchy. Rumors multiplied that Rasputin had assaulted female followers and behaved inappropriately on visits with the imperial family, and particularly with Nicholas's teenage daughters, Olga and Tatiana. During this period, the First World War, the dissolution of feudalism, and a meddling government bureaucracy all contributed to Russia's rapid economic decline. Many laid the blame on Alexandra and Rasputin. One outspoken member of the Duma, far-right politician Vladimir Purishkevich, stated in November 1916 that he held the Tsar's ministers had been turned into marionettes whose threads have been taken firmly in hand by Rasputin and the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, the evil genius of Russia and the Tsarina, who has remained a German on the Russian throne and alien to the country and its people. On the 12th of July 1914, a 33-year-old peasant woman named Kionia Guseva attempted to assassinate Rasputin by stabbing him in the stomach outside his home in Pokrovskoye. Rasputin was seriously wounded, and for a time it was not clear if he would survive. After surgery and some time in a hospital in Tyumen, he recovered. According to Guseva, she attacked Rasputin because she believed Rasputin to be a false prophet and even an antichrist. Many more assassination attempts were made against Rasputin, but every time he would miraculously survive, only adding to his godly and mystic aura. Every attempt of assassination uncovered the motives of the culprits, with accounts varying from sexual assault to blasphemy to the royal influence. However, all the controversies and accusations would finally act as a catalyst for the end of the Mad Monk. A group of nobles, Purishkevich, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, and Prince Felix Yusupov, believed that Rasputin's influence over Alexandra threatened the Russian Empire. They concocted a plan in December 1916 to kill Rasputin. According to Yusupov's account, Rasputin was invited to his palace shortly after midnight and ushered into the basement. Yusupov offered tea and cakes which had been laced with cyanide. After initially refusing the cakes, Rasputin began to eat them and, to Yusupov's surprise, appeared unaffected by the poison. Rasputin then asked for some Madeira wine, which had also been poisoned, and drank 3 glasses, but still showed no sign of distress. At around 2:30 a.m., Yusupov excused himself to go upstairs, where his fellow conspirators were waiting. He took a revolver from Pavlovich, then returned to the basement, and told Rasputin that he'd better look at the crucifix and say a prayer, referring to a crucifix in the room, then shot him once in the chest. The conspirators then drove to Rasputin's apartment, with Sukhotin wearing Rasputin's coat and hat in an attempt to make it look as though Rasputin had returned home that night. Upon returning to his palace, Yusupov went back to the basement to ensure that Rasputin was dead. Suddenly, Rasputin leaped up and attacked Yusupov, who freed himself with some effort and fled upstairs. Rasputin followed Yusupov into the palace's courtyard, where he was shot by Purishkevich. He collapsed into a snowbank. The conspirators then wrapped his body in cloth, drove it to the Petrovsky Bridge, and dropped it into the Little Nevka River, ending the terror of the Mad Monk. In an unsubstantiated claim, Grand Duchess Tatiana, who was earlier alleged to have been raped by Rasputin, was present at the site of Rasputin's murder, disguised as a lieutenant of the Chevalier's Guard, so that she could revenge herself on Rasputin, who had tried to violate her. News of Rasputin's murder spread quickly, even before his body was found. According to Smith, Poroshkevich spoke openly about the murder to 2 soldiers and to a policeman who was investigating reports of shots shortly after the event, but urged them not to tell anyone else. An investigation was launched the next morning. After 2 workmen discovered blood on the railing of the Petrovsky Bridge and a boot on the ice below, police began searching the area. Rasputin's body was found under the river ice on the 1st of January. Dmitry Kosarotov, the city's senior autopsy surgeon, examined the body. Kosarotov's report was lost, but he later stated that Rasputin's body had shown signs of severe trauma, including 3 gunshot wounds, a slice wound to his left side, and other injuries, many of which Kosarotov felt had been sustained post-mortem. Rasputin was buried on the 2nd of January at a small church that Vorobova had been building at Tsarskoye Selo. The funeral was attended only by the imperial family and a few of their intimates. Rasputin's wife, mistress, and children were not invited, although his daughters met with the imperial family at Vorobova's home later that day. The imperial family planned to build a church over Rasputin's gravesite. However, his body was exhumed and burned by a detachment of soldiers on the orders of Alexander Kerensky shortly after Nicholas abdicated the throne in March 1917, so that his grave would not become a rallying point for supporters of the old regime.